Hey, my name is Nathan. Most people call me Nate. I'm 33 years old and I live in a two-story house on Elm Park Road, about 8 minutes east of downtown Bardstown, Kentucky. It's a 3-bedroom house, which is more house than one person needs, but I bought it when I was 26 and married and expecting to fill the rooms with the kind of life that 3 bedrooms imply. That didn't happen. Now it's just me and more square footage than I know what to do with, and a thermostat I keep set to 68, because 68 is the right temperature for a house, and at least that's one thing I can get right. I'm an HVAC technician. I install and repair heating and cooling systems, furnaces, air conditioners, heat pumps, ductwork, the whole invisible infrastructure that makes a house livable. I work for a company called Hardin Comfort Systems, and I've been there 11 years, since I started as a helper at 22 hauling copper line sets up attic ladders in the August heat. Now I run my own service van. I handle the diagnostic calls, and I'm the one they send when a system is doing something nobody can figure out. I'm good at it. I can listen to a compressor cycle and tell you whether it's a capacitor, a contactor, or a refrigerant issue before I open the panel. I can feel a vent from across the room and know the airflow is off by 20%. I notice things about mechanical systems that most people don't notice. The subtle rattle before a blower motor fails, the faint chemical smell when a heat exchanger starts to crack, the way a house breathes differently when its ductwork is leaking. I notice everything about systems. I notice almost nothing about people. That's the thing about me that matters most, and I'm telling you now because if I don't, the rest of this won't make sense. My days are the same most weeks. I wake up at 5:45, shower, eat cereal or toast, fill my thermos, drive to the shop, pick up my work orders, and spend the day in other people's houses making their air the right temperature. I crawl through attics in July when it's 130 degrees in the insulation. I lie on my back under houses in January with frozen condensate lines dripping on my face. I come home around 6 smelling like refrigerant and duct sealant, shower again, and make dinner, which for the past 3 years has been one of 4 things: chili, pasta with jarred sauce, grilled cheese, or eggs. I eat at the kitchen counter, because eating at the table feels like a statement I'm not prepared to make. I watch whatever's on TV until I fall asleep on the couch, and then I wake up and do the whole thing again. I was married once. Her name was Jess. We were together for 5 years, married for 3 of them, and she left on a Tuesday morning in April 2 years ago. She didn't leave because I was cruel or unfaithful or any of the things that make a good story. She left because I wasn't paying attention. That's what she said, standing in the kitchen with her bag already in the car. Her voice steady in a way that told me she'd practiced this, and the practicing had used up whatever emotion was originally in it. I've been unhappy for a long time, Nate, and you didn't notice. That's the problem. You just didn't notice. She was right. I hadn't noticed. I had been showing up, going to work, coming home, watching TV, keeping the house at 68 degrees, and believing that because nothing was visibly broken, everything was fine. I was treating my marriage the way I treat a system that's running. If it's not making noise, it's working. But Jess had been making noise for 2 years, and I had tuned it out the way you tune out a refrigerator hum, because it was constant and quiet, and I had trained myself not to hear it. I spent my days diagnosing the exact thing wrong with other people's houses, and I could not diagnose what was wrong with my own. I could hear a compressor failing from 30 feet. I could not hear my wife leaving from across the kitchen table. After Jess left, I did what I always do. I kept going. I went to work. I came home. I made chili. I set the thermostat to 68. The house ran fine. Everything was technically operational. But technically operational is not the same thing as livable, and I think I knew that, somewhere in the back of my mind, The same way you know a system is running but not right. Something's off. Something's a few degrees wrong. And you can feel it in the air even if you can't name it. The cooking class was Jess's idea, which is ironic. Not recently. She'd suggested it years ago, back when she was still trying to get me to do things that weren't work. Sign up for something, Nate. Take a class. Learn to make something that isn't chili. I hadn't done it then because I was comfortable, and because comfortable felt like enough. I signed up 2 years after she left, because one night in September I sat down at the kitchen counter with a bowl of reheated chili and a plastic spoon, and I looked at the bowl, and I looked at the empty counter, and I thought, with a clarity that hit me like a diagnostic reading I couldn't argue with, this is it. This is the next 30 years. Chili and a plastic spoon and a counter I eat at because the table is too big for one person. Unless I do something. The class was Thursday nights at the community center on 3rd Street. 8 weeks, 2 hours a session, called Fundamentals of Home Cooking, which sounded safe and unglamorous enough that I figured the other students would be people like me. Adults who had reached their 30s and realized they couldn't feed themselves properly. I signed up online, paid the $60 fee, and spent the week before the first class talking myself out of going at least 4 times. I'm not a class person. I'm not a group activity person. I am a person who is comfortable with copper fittings and condensers and uncomfortable with rooms full of strangers who might expect me to make conversation while chopping an onion. The first Thursday in October, I almost didn't go. I sat in my truck in the community center parking lot for 11 minutes. I watched other people walk in, a retired couple, 2 women who seemed to know each other, a guy about my age who looked as uncertain as I felt. I had the engine running and my hand was on the gear shift and I was calculating the exact route home and how quickly I could be back on my couch with the TV on and the evening salvaged. Then I turned off the truck and went inside because I thought about the chili and the plastic spoon and the 30 years, and I decided that sitting in a parking lot afraid of a cooking class was a worse version of myself than I was willing to accept. The kitchen was a long room with 6 stations, each with a stove, a cutting board, a set of knives, and a stack of ingredients. The instructor was already at the front. A man in his early 60s with a gray beard and a white apron that had seen enough use to have its own history. His name was Ray Kendall. He'd owned a restaurant in Louisville for 20 years before he retired, and he taught this class every fall. Because, as he put it, everybody deserves to eat something that was made with attention, including the person who made it. Ray pointed people to stations and told us we'd be working in pairs. I stood at Station 4 alone, assuming I'd be the odd one out, which felt appropriate. Then the door opened, and she walked in. She was late by about 2 minutes, and not remotely embarrassed about it. She came through the door carrying a canvas bag over one shoulder, and an apron she was already unfolding as she walked, like she'd started getting ready in the car. Her hair was brown and pulled up in a knot that was held together by a pencil. An actual pencil, yellow, with teeth marks on the end. The kind a person grabs from a desk when they can't find a clip and doesn't think about it again. She was wearing a blue button-down shirt with the sleeves already rolled to her elbows, and there was a small stain on the cuff that looked like tempera paint. She moved through the room like she knew where she was going even though she'd never been there, with the kind of calm, purposeful energy that I associate with people who are used to managing small emergencies all day. Which, I'd learn later, was exactly what she did. She walked up to Station 4, set her bag on the counter, tied her apron in a knot at the back without looking, and turned to me. "I'm Clara," she said. "Nathan, Nate." She looked at the station, the cutting board, the ingredients, the 2 sets of utensils laid out side by side. Then she looked at me. We're partners now, she said. Not a question, not a suggestion. A fact, delivered with the same pleasant authority you'd use to tell a 5-year-old that yes, we are washing our hands before lunch. Okay, I said. Have you cooked before? I make chili. From scratch? From a can. She looked at me for one beat longer than was comfortable, and then she said, "We're going to fix that," and turned to face Ray, who was starting the first lesson, which was knife skills and a basic vinaigrette. I was terrible. I want to be clear about that. I held the knife wrong. I cut the onion into pieces that were so uneven Clara picked one up between her fingers and turned it slowly, examining it like a specimen. "This piece is the size of a grape," she said. "This one is the size of a pea. The vinaigrette is going to be very confused." "I'm an HVAC technician," I said, as if that explained anything. That explains the thermostat confidence, not the knife skills. I looked at her. She was smiling, not at me, at the situation. At the absurdity of a grown man who could diagnose a failing compressor by sound, but could not cut an onion into even pieces. There was no meanness in it. There was warmth, and a directness that I was not used to from anyone, and something else I couldn't identify yet but that felt like being seen. Not the way Jess had seen me, which was with increasing disappointment, but the way you see a piece of equipment that needs calibrating. Objectively, without judgment, with the clear understanding that the problem is fixable. She showed me how to hold the knife. She put her hand over mine on the handle and adjusted my grip. Fingertips curled under on the guide hand, blade rocking from the tip, and her hand was warm and sure, and completely unself-conscious about the fact that it was touching mine. She did it the way I adjust a thermostat, without ceremony, because it needed doing. By the end of the first class, our vinaigrette was good. Hers was good. I had mostly watched and followed her instructions and tried not to cut myself. Ray came by the station, tasted it, nodded, and said, "Somebody here knows what they're doing." He looked at Clara, "And somebody here is going to learn." He looked at me. "That's the plan," Clara said. I drove home that night and sat at my kitchen counter and realized I was not going to eat chili. Not because I had anything else to eat, I didn't, but because something about the evening had shifted the way the air shifts when a system comes online for the first time after a repair. A hum. A current. The feeling that something that had been off was now moving in the right direction. The second Thursday, I showed up on time. Clara showed up 2 minutes late, pencil in her hair, paint stain on the other cuff this time. She walked to Station 4, tied her apron, and said, "Tell me you practiced the onion." I practiced the onion. "Show me your hands." I held them up. There was a small bandage on my left index finger. "Progress," she said, and she meant it. The second class was a simple roast chicken with root vegetables. Ray walked us through spatchcocking, removing the backbone and pressing the bird flat, and I found, to my surprise, that I was decent at it. The mechanical logic of it made sense to me. It was structural. It was about understanding how the thing was put together so you could take it apart efficiently. Clara watched me work the shears through the backbone and said, "Okay, so you're good at the destructive part." I prefer to call it disassembly. You would. We roasted the chicken, and it was good. It was actually good. The skin was crispy, and the thigh meat was juicy, and the vegetables had caramelized in the drippings, and when I tasted it, I stood at the station and felt something I hadn't felt in my own kitchen in years, which was the simple satisfaction of having made something worth eating. Clara was watching me. "There it is," she said. "There's what?" "The face people make when they realize food can be more than fuel." She wiped her hands on her apron, I see it in my kindergartners when they finish a painting they're actually proud of. Same face. You just compared me to a 5-year-old. If the paint stain fits. I started to look forward to Thursdays in a way I hadn't looked forward to anything since before Jess left. I didn't examine it. I didn't name it. I just noticed that on Wednesday nights I would find myself checking that I had clean clothes for the next day, and that on Thursday mornings I would drive to work with a feeling in my chest that was lighter than usual, and that on Thursday evenings I would pull into the community center parking lot and not sit in the truck for 11 minutes calculating the route home. Clara and I developed a rhythm. She handled flavor, tasting, seasoning, adjusting the balance of acid and fat and salt in ways that seemed instinctive to her. I handled structure, the cutting, the temperature management, the timing. She'd say it needs more acid, and I'd hand her the lemon. I'd say the pan's too cool, and she'd step back so I could adjust the heat. We moved around each other at the station the way two people move who have been working in the same space long enough to know where the other one will be without looking. Ray noticed. I could see him watching us from the front of the room with an expression that was not quite a smile, but was adjacent to one. She was a kindergarten teacher at Bardstown Elementary. She told me this during the 3rd class, while we were making fresh pasta, rolling the dough through a hand-crank machine that she operated with the efficiency of someone who has managed 30 small humans and a laminator and a classroom hamster all before lunch. She loved the work. She talked about her students the way I talked about a well-diagnosed system, with specificity and admiration for the small things that most people don't notice. This one had started writing his name without help. That one had figured out how to share the red crayon without being asked. A girl named Olive had told Clara that she wanted to be a teacher when she grew up, and Clara had to go to the supply closet and close the door for a minute because she didn't want to cry in front of 25-year-olds. I told her about VAC. I expected her eyes to glaze over, most people's do, but she asked questions. Real questions. How do you know what's wrong when you walk into a house? What does a failing system sound like compared to a healthy one? How do you fix something when you can't see it? She listened to my answers the way she listened to her students, with her whole attention, like the thing being said mattered because the person saying it mattered. Nobody had listened to me like that in a long time. In the 4th class, she burned the caramel. This was notable because Clara did not make mistakes in the kitchen, or if she did, she corrected them so quickly that you'd never know. But she burned the caramel. She was standing at the stove, and the sugar was melting, and she was somewhere else. I could see it. Her hands were still, but her eyes were far away, fixed on a point that was not in this room, and the sugar went from amber to black in the 10 seconds she was gone. "Hey," I said. She blinked. She looked at the pan. She turned off the burner and stood there for a moment, and I saw something in her face that I recognized. The look of someone who was carrying a weight they set down for a few hours every Thursday and just got reminded it was still there. "Sorry," she said. "Start over." "Clara, it's fine. Start over. Sugar. Medium heat. Don't stir." I didn't push. I had learned from Jess, or from losing Jess, that pushing someone to talk before they're ready is just another way of not paying attention. So I measured the sugar and put it in a clean pan, and we started over, and I didn't ask. She told me in the parking lot after class we had started doing that, standing by our cars after the session, talking for 20 or 30 minutes about nothing in particular. The way you talk when you're not ready for the evening to end, but you're not ready to name why. She was leaning against the trunk of her car, a 10-year-old Honda with a dent in the rear quarter panel and a bumper sticker that said, "Be kind to every kind." "My mom has Alzheimer's," she said. "Early onset. She's 59. She was diagnosed 3 years ago, and she's been in a memory care facility since January. She said it in a steady voice that had the particular flatness of something that has been said enough times that the words have been worn smooth, like a stone in a river. There was no tremor in it. There was no request for sympathy. There was just the fact, delivered the same way she delivered everything, directly, without decoration. I was her caregiver for 2 years before the facility, she said. Just me. My dad died when I was 14. I don't have siblings. It was me and her, and then it was me and a version of her that was disappearing a little more every week. And now it's me visiting her on Sundays, and sometimes she knows my name, and sometimes she calls me Linda, which was her sister who died in 1987. I leaned against the car beside her. Our arms were close but not touching. The cooking class, she said. I signed up because my mom and I used to cook together every Sunday. Every single Sunday. Since I was 5 years old. She taught me everything, how to season by instinct, how to know when bread dough has been kneaded enough just by the feel of it, how to fix a broken sauce without starting over. Cooking was our language. It was how we said I love you without saying it. She paused. Last year she forgot how to hold a spoon. I watched her look at it like she'd never seen one before. And I couldn't cook for 3 months after that. I couldn't stand in a kitchen without hearing her voice, telling me to taste before I season, and then remembering that she doesn't remember saying that. I stood beside her in the parking lot, and I felt something in my chest that was not pity and not sadness, but something more like recognition. The feeling of understanding a system, not a mechanical one, but a human one. The feeling of hearing the sound a thing makes when it's been running too hard for too long, with no one maintaining it. I signed up for the class because I needed cooking to be something again, she said. Not a loss, not a memory that hurts, just something. Something that belongs to me in the present tense. I was quiet for a while. A car drove past on 3rd Street, and its headlights swept the parking lot, and I could see her face in the light, and then it was dark again. Jess, I said. My ex-wife. She left 2 years ago because I wasn't paying attention. That's the exact phrase. I wasn't paying attention. She'd been telling me she was unhappy, and I didn't hear it because I was too busy keeping everything running to notice that the person standing next to me was freezing. I stopped. I spend my days making sure other people's houses are the right temperature, and I let my own marriage go cold because I couldn't be bothered to check the thermostat. Clara turned her head and looked at me. Not with sympathy, not with judgment. With the look of someone who understands exactly what it costs to say the truest thing about yourself out loud. You're here now, she said. What? You're paying attention now. You're standing in a parking lot at 9:30 at night listening to me talk about my mother, and you haven't checked your phone once. You notice when the pan's too cool. You noticed I burned the caramel tonight before I did. She paused. I think you're someone who had to lose something important before he learned how to see what was right in front of him. That's not a tragedy, Nate. That's just an expensive lesson. She reached over and put her hand on my forearm and left it there for 3 seconds, and then took it back. And the place where her hand had been stayed warm in the cool October air in a way that had nothing to do with thermodynamics and everything to do with the fact that a person had touched me with intention for the first time in 2 years. After that night, Thursdays were not enough. We started cooking outside of class. She came to my house on a Sunday, the first time anyone other than my coworker Pete had been inside it since Jess left. And she looked at my kitchen the way I look at a system that's been neglected. She opened the pantry. She opened the refrigerator. She looked at the 4 cans of chili on the shelf and the half-empty jar of pasta sauce and the eggs and the bread, and she closed the refrigerator and turned to me. "We're going shopping," she said. We went to the grocery store, and she filled the cart with things I had never bought: shallots, fresh thyme, good butter, a block of Parmesan, a bag of arborio rice, lemons. She explained each item as she put it in the cart, not pedantically but the way Ray explained things, with the assumption that I was capable of understanding if someone just took the time to show me. At the checkout, the total was more than I usually spent in 2 weeks. She said, "Your kitchen is an investment, not an expense," and she said it in her teacher voice, the one that brooked no argument. We cooked risotto in my kitchen that afternoon. She stood beside me at the stove and taught me to stir, slowly, patiently, adding the broth one ladle at a time, waiting for the rice to absorb it before adding more. "You can't rush it," she said. "The rice tells you when it's ready. You just have to watch." I watched. Not just the rice. I watched her. The way she moved in my kitchen like she was bringing it back to life. The way she tasted from the wooden spoon and closed her eyes and tilted her head and then reached for the salt without opening them. The way she hummed something tuneless while the rice simmered. The way she stopped humming when she caught me looking, and then started again when she decided she didn't mind. We ate the risotto at my kitchen table. I had pulled a second chair from the garage, a folding chair, metal, not remotely matching the table, and she sat in it, and I sat in my usual spot, and we ate together, and the kitchen felt different. Not warmer in the thermostat sense. Warmer in the way a room feels when the system is finally running the way it was designed to. "This table is too nice for a folding chair," she said. "I know. You need a real chair. I know that too. Is there a reason you've been eating at this table alone with one chair for 2 years?" I looked at the table. "Same reason you couldn't cook for 3 months. Some things are tied to a person, and when the person leaves, the thing they were tied to becomes hard to use." She looked at me, and I could tell she heard what I was actually saying, which was not about the chair. 2 weeks later, on a Saturday, Clara called me, and her voice was different. Tight, controlled in the way that people sound when they are working very hard to hold something together. "Derek's here," she said. Derek was her ex-boyfriend. He'd been her partner, in the other sense of the word, for 1.5 years during her mother's worst decline. He was a real estate appraiser, clean-cut, reliable on paper. He'd said he was in it with her. He'd said he understood what caregiving meant. And then, slowly, he'd started being unavailable. A work trip that ran long. A weekend he needed for himself. A phone call he didn't pick up on a night when her mother had wandered out of the house at 2 a.m, and Clara had found her standing in the yard in her nightgown, barefoot, calling for a dog they'd had 20 years ago. Clara had called Derek, and the phone had rung, and the next morning he'd said sorry. He'd been asleep, and she'd known then that asleep was a choice. He'd ended it 3 months before her mother went into the facility. He'd said the caregiving was too much, and he needed to prioritize his own mental health, which Clara said she might have respected if he'd ever once prioritized hers. Now he was at her apartment. She hadn't invited him. He'd shown up because. And here her voice got the specific quality of someone reciting something they find repellent. He'd heard her mother was in a facility now, and he thought maybe they could try again, since things were more manageable. "I told him to leave," she said. "He's not leaving. He's sitting in his car outside my building, and he texted me that he just wants to talk, and he's going to wait until I'm ready." "I'm coming over," I said. "Nate, you don't have to. I know I don't have to. I'm coming over." I drove to her apartment on Flaggett Street in 12 minutes. Derek's car was parked across the street, a blue sedan, freshly washed, the kind of car that tells you nothing about the person who drives it. He was sitting in the driver's seat looking at his phone. I parked behind Clara's Honda and walked up to the building and buzzed, and she let me in. Her apartment was small and warm and full of the evidence of who she was, children's drawings pinned to a corkboard, a shelf of cookbooks with cracked spines, a framed photo of a woman who looked like Clara but 25 years older, smiling, holding a pie. Clara was standing in the kitchen with her arms crossed, and she looked the way she looked when a lesson plan went sideways, frustrated, capable, deciding what to do. "He's been out there for 40 minutes, she said. "Okay." I told him we're done. I told him a year ago. He thinks if he just waits long enough, I'll give in, because giving in is easier than standing in the yard at 2 in the morning alone. "Do you want me to talk to him?" "No." She said it fast and firm. "This is mine. I need to do this." She walked out the front door and I followed her and stood on the steps. Derek got out of his car when he saw her. He was exactly what I expected. Medium height, clean-shaven, wearing a jacket that looked recently purchased. He had the expression of a man who has rehearsed sincerity. "Clara, I just want to talk. You had a year and a half to talk, Derek. You had every night I called you crying from the bathroom because my mother didn't know who I was, and I was scared and exhausted and alone. You had the night she wandered into the yard and I called you 7 times, and you chose to sleep through it. That was your talk. That was you talking. You told me exactly who you are, and I heard you. That's not fair. I was overwhelmed. You were overwhelmed." She said it quietly, which was worse than if she'd shouted. I was giving my mother a bath because she'd forgotten how. I was feeding her with a spoon because she couldn't remember how to use a fork. I was grieving a person who was still alive and sitting across from me. And you were overwhelmed. Derek opened his mouth, and nothing came out. He looked at me on the steps and then back at Clara, and I could see him recalculating, the way a thermostat recalculates when the temperature reading doesn't match the setting. The system expected a different response and doesn't know how to adjust. Her mother's in a facility now, he was thinking. I could read it on his face. The hard part was over. He could come back now that someone else was carrying the weight. He had arrived with the emotional equivalent of showing up to a job site after the work is done and expecting credit for being there. "Don't come here again," Clara said. "I mean it. We're done. We've been done since the night you didn't answer the phone, and every day since then has just been me making peace with what you showed me." She turned around and walked back up the steps past me and went inside, and Derek stood in the street, looking like a man who has just discovered that the door he assumed would always be open has been quietly, permanently locked. I followed her inside. She was in the kitchen, leaning against the counter with her hands gripping the edge, and she was not crying. She was breathing. Slowly, deliberately, the way you breathe when you are choosing not to fall apart. "Thank you for coming," she said. "You didn't need me." "No," she said, "but I wanted you here. There's a difference, and it's an important one." I let that land. I let it sit in the air between us, and I heard it, really heard it, the way I should have heard Jess, the way I'd spent 2 years learning to hear the things that people say that are more than what they say. "Clara," I said, "I need to tell you something, and I need to say it now, because I have spent my entire adult life not saying things when they needed to be said, and I am not going to do that again." She looked at me. I signed up for that cooking class because I was eating canned chili alone at my kitchen counter, and I realized I'd been sleepwalking through my own life. I showed up because I was tired of being the person who keeps things running without ever asking what he's running them for. And then you walked in 2 minutes late with a pencil in your hair and told me we were partners, and everything in my life recalibrated. I stopped. I could feel my pulse in my hands. You taught me how to pay attention. Not to the food, to everything. To the temperature of a room when someone walks into it. To the difference between a person who's fine and a person who's performing fine. To the way it feels to stand next to someone who actually wants to be standing next to you. I missed all of that before. I'm not missing it now. She was quiet. She was still holding the edge of the counter. You're not slow, Nate, she said. You're just someone who had to learn the hard way. My mom taught me that some people come to the stove already knowing how to cook, and some people need to burn the first batch before they understand what the heat actually does. She let go of the counter. You burn the first batch. You're here now. That's the part that matters. She walked over to me and I kissed her, standing in her small kitchen with the children's drawings on the corkboard, and the cookbooks with the cracked spines, and the photo of her mother holding a pie on the shelf behind us. She tasted like the ginger tea she'd been drinking, and her hands were on my shoulders, and the kiss was neither careful nor careless. It was the kind of kiss that happens when two people have spent weeks circling the same truth and finally stop circling. When she pulled back, she put her hand flat on my chest, over my heart, and left it there. 68 degrees, she said. What? Your heart. That's what it feels like. Exactly the right temperature. I laughed. She laughed. It was the first time I'd laughed like that. Real. Unguarded. Starting in my chest and coming out before I could think about whether laughing was the appropriate response, in longer than I could remember. A year later, the house on Elm Park Road was the same house. Same 3 bedrooms, same kitchen, same table. But the table had 2 chairs now. Real ones, not folding chairs, bought together on a Saturday from a woodworker at the Bardstown Craft Fair who built them by hand from Kentucky walnut. Clara had picked them out. She'd sat in 4 different pairs before choosing, testing each one with the focused attention she brought to everything. Not just sitting, but sitting with her whole body, checking the height against the table, the angle of the back, the way the wood felt under her palms. Clara had moved in 3 months after the night in her kitchen. She'd brought the cookbooks and the corkboard and the photo of her mother and a set of cast-iron pans that had belonged to her grandmother and weighed more than some of the equipment in my van. She taught kindergarten during the day and cooked in the evening, and every Sunday she drove to the memory care facility to sit with her mother, and some Sundays her mother said her name, and some Sundays she didn't. And on the Sundays she didn't, Clara came home and stood in the kitchen and made her mother's pie crust from memory, butter, flour, a little vinegar, cold water, hands working fast. And the kitchen smelled like her mother's kitchen had smelled, and that was enough. That was the thing she could keep. Ray Kendall had started a second session of the class in the spring, and Clara and I had signed up again. Not because either of us needed the instruction, but because Thursday nights at Station 4 had become something we were not willing to give up. Ray had watched us walk in together the first night of the new session, and had said nothing. But he'd put 2 coffee cups at our station instead of 1, which from Ray was the equivalent of a standing ovation. "You two," he said one Thursday, watching Clara adjust the seasoning on a braise while I managed the temperature. "You know what makes a good kitchen team? It's not skill. It's not who's faster. It's 2 people who trust each other enough to stay out of each other's way and close enough to hand each other the salt." On a Thursday evening in November, I came home from work and Clara was in the kitchen. She had flour on her forearms and the radio on low, and she was rolling out dough for a galette, pressing the pen forward with that precise, easy rhythm that looked effortless and was not. I stood in the doorway and I watched her, and I thought about a September night a year ago when I had sat at this counter with a bowl of canned chili and a plastic spoon and seen the next 30 years of my life and known they would be empty. She looked up. Flour on her cheek. Pencil in her hair. The same paint stain on the same blue cuff. Or maybe a new one. She went through them fast enough that it didn't matter. "You're staring," she said. "I'm paying attention," I said. "There's a difference, and it's an important one." She smiled. Not the ghost of a smile, not the architecture of one. The real thing, full and warm and unhesitating, given the way she gave everything. Completely, without conditions, like it was the most natural thing in the world to offer someone the whole of yourself just because they were finally paying attention. I had once believed that a life kept at 68 degrees, steady, controlled, nothing too hot, nothing too cold, was enough. I had believed that keeping things running was the same as keeping things alive, but Clara had walked into a cooking class 2 minutes late, with a pencil in her hair and 4 words that changed everything. And from those 4 words I had learned that a house is not a home because the system works. A house is a home because someone in it is paying attention. To the heat, to the seasoning, to the person standing beside them at the stove, and if you are very lucky, and if you stop sleepwalking long enough to notice, the person standing beside you will turn and say the only thing that ever really mattered. "We're partners now." That's all. We're partners now.